Franklin County.
And I'm Bobby Starr, representing Orleans, Essex County. So we want to welcome you folks to our meeting this morning, and we'll get updates from you folks in regards to our food systems and the security of it, and what requests that you still lacking to have, or things that we need to do here in the final weeks of the session to try to make everybody whole. Of course, the school breakfast and lunch deal is a big issue that we sort of work on that every day now. Hoping to get that across the finish line, so we'll have that in our schools. So we have no set schedule on who speaks first or last, but maybe Betsy, if sort of have you at the head of the list. So if you want to invite our guests to be with us as you see fit, that would be fine with us.
All right, thank you, Chair, and good morning. We're so happy to be having this discussion with you this morning. And Carrie Stayler with the Vermont Food Bank is going to lead us off here.
Yeah. Good.
Betsy, I'm sorry, would you mind if Becca let us off? I think I was going to finish us up. Is that okay? Thank you. Let me introduce Becca Warren from the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. We'll just all go around and introduce each other and never introduce ourselves, right? Becca's going to start us off this morning because I think she has a really good global picture of what's going on and will help set the stage for the rest of our speakers.
Thank you, Carrie. Good morning, everybody. My name is Becca Warren. I am the Food Security Plan Project Manager at the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and I'm one of the Farm to Plate Network backbone staff. I live in Heartland, and thank you for the opportunity to have us all here today to talk about food security with you. So I'm here today to ask for your support of the Sustainable Jobs Fund's $150,000 request for food security planning in the budget you are currently considering. Also to request your help. We're all here together to talk about requesting your help finding a home for food security in the legislature. And then thirdly, to ask you to support all the food security funding requests before you this session, including the Vermont Food Bank's request for $6 million to continue to address the high sustained need they're seeing across the state still today. So as you know, a year ago, we released the new Vermont Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan. And within that strategic plan, we have many strategic priorities that the Farm to Plate Network and others will tackle over the coming decade. One strategic priority that's being tackled now is the strategy to develop a Vermont food security roadmap, to center that roadmap around a strong local food system and include community responses to food insecurity that we've seen across the state. So the food security roadmap will outline both immediate and longer term strategies to ensure that everyone in Vermont has physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food that meets their dietary needs for an active and healthy life. And in addition, because we are Vermont, we are putting our agricultural producers and a secure food supply at the center of this work. So the roadmap will in part be a bridge between household food security and the local agricultural development we're doing within the network and in the legislature under the strategic plan. So the planning for this food security roadmap is underway in deep collaboration across the state with my colleagues here today, and it's partially funded. The project is partially funded, but in January, Jobs Fund staff testified before the House Committee on Agriculture and Forestry and made a request for $150,000 to complete the food security project. The House committee included the request in their memo to House Appropriations, and it was included in the House version of the state budget, which passed recently. And we would be happy, Jobs Fund staff, network members, to come in and give your committee a briefing on what is involved in that project specifically. And we hope that your committee will also favorably support the $150,000 request in the budget you're currently considering. So the food security planning effort already involved over 120 people from organizations across the state and is an outgrowth of collaborative work to solve gaps in the food system and address the issues of hunger in our towns. And as we continue to grow these collaborations across Vermont, one question we continue to ask is, how will we work with the legislature once this roadmap is developed so that we can implement the actions that have been determined to be most effective? Because the food security roadmap will include agricultural development and charitable feeding and emergency planning, transportation, housing, climate change, preparedness, racial equity, other important issues facing our communities. So we came to you because historically you have been interested in issues such as food access, and because agriculture is critical to securing our food supply. And you'll hear from my colleagues today specific examples of how it would help to have food security held within the jurisdiction of one legislative committee who could help guide and support Vermont's food security policies and focus for the future. So we're asking for your help in determining if food security should live in your committee under the banner of agriculture, or if you can help us find the most appropriate place for our food security work to live within the legislature. And similarly, today we're here to ask you to support all the food security related funding requests currently before the legislature. So just like our request for your help figuring out a legislative home for food security, the funding we have all collectively requested is needed to meet the complexity of what we see with food security in Vermont. So some of the funding my colleagues are seeking in their organizations is for immediate ongoing needs to respond to food shortages in our towns. For example, the $6 million to help the food bank meet the current need for charitable food in the state. And other funding requests will make a permanent long-term change to food security. For example, ensuring kids are fed every day at school with local products as part of that menu. So we are creating this action plan for food security. Part of that is the action we need to take now on all of the very complex solutions to hunger and food scarcity in our state. So we're hopeful that you'll be able to work together with this coalition of organizations to find an appropriate committee for food security in the legislature so that we can work together with all of you to address the imminent food needs of Vermonters now and to increase the security of our food supply in the long term as well. And we just so appreciate your support of our work. And for myself, your consideration of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund $150,000 request in the fiscal year 23 budget to fully support the food security roadmap for Vermont. So thank you. My colleagues are going to go into more detail on various pieces so you can understand the full picture, and I'm available for questions.
Yeah. Do you want to do questions now or after the presenters are finished?
I think Senator starts, it's really up to you. If people have questions now, they, for me specifically, or we can just ask as we go along. I think everyone's very flexible.
Yeah. Well, are there any particular questions for Becca on what she has talked about? Maybe the 150,000, Becca, has that been funded before? Or is this a new figure to move forward with?
It's a one-time funding request for this year only, this fiscal year or coming fiscal year, to round out the funding so we can complete the food security planning process. And, you know, I know Ellen and myself and Jake would love to come in and speak with you, speak with the committee more fully about what that roadmap and planning process will be for food security, so you can, fully understand it as you consider it?
Yeah, and so it's a one-time request to do the roadmap and get that all finalized and a plan put in place.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I was wondering, which is a more difficult question, is you talked a little bit about what committee might be best to here in the legislature to deal with food security and the feeding of our people. And just at the top of my head, you have basically health and welfare, which I would think would be sort of concerned about the health of people. If they don't eat properly, it's gonna their health is gonna go down, and it's gonna cost a lot of money to keep these people healthy if we don't feed them right. And you've got the two ag committees. It's sort of an issue that's in between quite a few committees, because if you don't keep the appropriations committee kind of happy with your ideas, you don't get any money. And it all boils down to that. And then, the education committee is very interested in food security for all the school children. And so it's a combo of committees. And, the last few years, I guess the ag committee has sort of started things, then it moves to, the education committee or health and welfare. And the advantage of the process that we're using is if you can get a majority of the ag committee, a majority of the education committee, and possibly a majority of the health and welfare committee on your side, or maybe most of our bills will go out of committee 5-0. You've got half the Senate that's already on your side. So the end run it makes it much easier than if you had just one committee and say the bill goes out 5-0 and then goes to the floor. It's a lot nicer if you've got a cushion there of quite a few votes already that have already approved something to get it over the finish line. So we need to discuss that, I think, further and more deeply and get into the politics of getting a bill passed. So anything else from committee? No? So anyways, it's a little something to think about.
Yes, thank you, Senator. And I think folks who are testifying after me will have a little more detail, and we'll add to that those different puzzles and thoughts that we want to be mulling over as we think about this question. And I know they have more details. I think our next speaker is Trevor coming next. I don't see him on the call, but maybe, oh, there you are, Trevor. All right, so Trevor is going to take over.
Yeah, morning, Trevor.
Morning, Senators. Thank you, Becca. My name is Trevor Lowell. I'm joining you from beautiful Topsom, Vermont, and I'm the Farm to Institution Program Manager at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, where I help facilitate connections between Vermont public and private institutions and local farmers and producers through state-funded grant programs. And I'm also the Agricultural Development Division's lead on issues related to food access and nutrition and security. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all this morning and to share my perspective on the various ways in which our state is working to address nutrition insecurity. Making sure all Vermonters have access to enough nutritious and culturally appropriate food to meet their basic needs is a Herculean undertaking, and the ways in which we go about this are many. There are dozens of public and private partners across the state operating multitudes of programs designed to help Vermonters meet their nutritional needs. Shortly after the pandemic began in March of 2020, the State Emergency Operations Center, in partnership with the Agency of Education, stood up a bi-weekly meeting of various stakeholders who were engaged in one way or another in addressing hunger and nutrition insecurity. This new group, dubbed the Mass Feeding Group, started looking for ways to address the alarming growth in nutrition insecurity as a result of the pandemic. Every time the group met to discuss these issues, several more names were added to the meeting invite list. And what started as a small group of mostly state employees quickly expanded to a large coalition of stakeholders from across the state. The rapid expansion of the Mass Feeding Group showed just how many people and organizations are involved in combating hunger and nutrition insecurity in Vermont. The other thing it demonstrated was the value of having a space where all of these various stakeholders could come together to share ideas and discuss how to best coordinate all the various initiatives in the nutrition security space. Originally conceived of as a temporary group focused on an acute pandemic-related problem, the Mass Feeding Group continues to this day. As more voices join the group, the value of having a dedicated space to discuss coordinated statewide anti-hunger strategies is more salient than ever. And as Becca and her team continue their critical work of creating a statewide nutrition security plan for Vermont, it's important for us to consider how that plan will be implemented and what structures will best facilitate the success of that implementation. Who will own that work? Where will decisions be made, and how will these various efforts be coordinated so as to maximize the impact of this vital work? So I'm happy to take any questions you have for me, but I just wanted to share that perspective as a state employee and someone who's working in these spaces of again, having that space and having that platform to coordinate the very diverse and multitude of efforts it takes to address this really critical issue. So thank you for your time, and again, happy to take questions now or answer them after others have spoken.
Yeah, well, thank you, Trevor. Are there questions for Trevor? No. Maybe, Trevor, how do you feel have things been going quite smoothly, working with all the groups from the state's point of view?
Yeah, I think Vermont is very fortunate that we have incredible collaboration and partnerships. I think the Mass Feeding Group was something that was kind of a unique, again, one-time opportunity to bring a lot of these folks together. And I think what remains uncertain is kind of how that group lives on. Right now, the State Emergency Operations Center is continuing to host those meetings, and I think people are finding a lot of value in that, and more people are showing up every week. So I think the takeaway for me is that the impact is so much greater when there is coordination, when we can consider all of the ways in which we address these issues, share those strategies, bring the expertise into a shared space, and be able to have a discussion around how to best tackle what is a really tricky but really vital issue. So I think we're very fortunate in Vermont to have these partnerships and to have so many folks both within state agencies and within partners across the state working together on this. And I know from colleagues in other states that that's not always the case.
No, and it's sad when it doesn't work like that, because we're so small that we all need to come to an agreement that you may not get everything you want, but this is the best we're gonna do and pull the wagon in the same direction. And, you get the job done. That, I mean, it works like that right here in Montpelier. We're, of course, have 3 different parties, and if you can work to get everybody, all 3 on board on an issue, you can accomplish a lot. You may not get everything you want, but it's really a movement forward that really makes a difference. If they're, Chris, we have Trevor Lowell on. I'm sure you can see him. Did you have any questions for?
No, I just, nope, just turned my camera on. I've been listening right along. Nice to see everybody.
Yeah. So, who is up next?
I believe Honor is up next.
Yes, and good morning, everybody. I am, Faye Mack is on your schedule, but she is testifying in a different committee right now. So sadly, you're stuck with me this morning. I'm Honor Horton with Hunger Free Vermont. And it is really a pleasure to be with all of you today and having this really important and thoughtful discussion. I think that I think Trevor was a little too modest just there in response to your question, Senator Starr, about how direct service providers and advocacy organizations, like many of us gathered here with you today, and state agency staff have been working together during the pandemic. I just want you all to know that it's really been quite an extraordinary experience and a very unique one. USDA and FEMA held some meetings in the states to hear about how emergency food provision was going and the different innovative approaches that had been created. And Vermont was the only state in the country where the service providers and advocates and state agency people asked to have a meeting with USDA together. And USDA could hardly believe it, because in no other state did the service providers and advocates want to be in the same meeting with the state agency staff. So I just, a shout out to our state agency partners and the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets in particular. So, so our organizations, all of us gathered here, have been partnering in a lot of different ways together for many, many years. But as that example, I hope illustrated, the pandemic has brought us all together in much more intentional ways as we grapple with how to address what we're seeing right now, which are, and throughout the pandemic, which are historic levels of food insecurity in our state, and also how to build the structural changes that will really address food insecurity in Vermont in a permanent way, and apply the lessons we've learned during the pandemic to creating a future where this isn't going to happen again. This increased collaboration has really made our work better, and it's made our efforts a lot more effective too. And so we're here collectively today to ask for you to support the different levers that address food insecurity, and also your support, as you've already heard, in creating a space within the legislature, or perhaps a way to keep the legislature's attention focused on these levers, because food insecurity, unfortunately, is not going away unless we really do some things about it. And certainly these historic levels of food insecurity and hunger we're seeing right now are unlikely to recede quickly if if previous recessions have been any guide. So the first piece we're here to ask you for is that the Vermont Food Bank is requesting $6 million appropriation for fiscal year 23. And we strongly, at Hunger Free Vermont, we strongly support this request. The food bank is continuing to distribute unprecedented amounts of food. And because we don't have all the structural pieces in place that we need to address ongoing hunger and food insecurity, that emergency food provision is absolutely essential. 1 in 3 people in our state have faced hunger in the last couple of years. Many special federal COVID-19 pandemic support programs have ended, including expanded unemployment, extra food distributions, and the expanded child tax credit, to name just 3 that very directly affect the ability of Vermont families and individuals to afford or acquire sufficient healthy food. And inflation, of course, is making it harder and harder to afford groceries. So more people are turning to their local Veggie Van Go distributions and local food shelves to put food on the table. So the food bank really must have this essential funding in order to be able to make sure that people across our state have the food they need right now. I think, Senator Starr, that what you said early on this morning about the power of having different kinds of requests, different kinds of ideas go to multiple committees is really right. That it is powerful to have different committees engaged in the conversation about how to address hunger and food insecurity in the State House, because as you rightly said, hunger and food insecurity, it lives in a lot of different places, and the solutions live in a lot of different places. So schools and childcare providers, other senior centers, Meals on Wheels distributions, many places hold keys to the solution to hunger and food insecurity. But I still think that having a place where in the legislature, a committee is tracking that, is asking the questions, and is kind of organizing and helping all of us to think through where these different requests should go, might be a really valuable way to concentrate all of our efforts more effectively and make sure that inside the State House, thinking about hunger and food insecurity and how to permanently solve these challenges is kind of ever present in people's minds in different committees. Let's see, what else do I want to talk to you about here? So I think you all already know this, but just to flag that the state and federal governments have been stepping up in the last couple of years to make sure that people are fed, but a lot of this is in a temporary way. So 3 Squares Vermont benefits are still expanded on an emergency basis. We've had 2.5 years, as you know, of federally funded universal school meals. Vermont Everyone Eats, one of our most kind of innovative pandemic programs, have made a huge difference, but they're all set to end, and soon. At the same time, the need for these programs, hunger and food insecurity, shows no signs of dissipating. In fact, what's going to happen is that hunger is going to skyrocket when all of these different programs start to close down. And we're here today, I think, preaching to the choir with you all to say that we really have to make sure that doesn't happen. And of course, you know, since this committee launched what is now S100, universal school meals will have a lasting impact on child hunger. It is it is one key step in creating a structural solution to hunger in Vermont. The House is working really hard right now to move S100 forward. And we're very excited by the work that the House Education Committee has been doing so that we can continue to provide universal school meals to all students in all schools in Vermont next fall, and we hope into the future. We, of course, very much want you to continue to support this important bill and make sure that it gets through the Senate when it comes over. We are hoping that what will come back over to you from the House will be a bill that includes what you all wrote into the original Healthy School Farm Fresh School Meals for All bill last year, which is both breakfast and lunch and funded in the education fund. And I'm happy to answer more questions if you have them about that. In addition to that, of course, and very complementary to it, is the local food purchasing incentive program. And this committee is the one that paired universal school meals with the local food purchasing incentive program to begin with. And we're so excited to see that program being funded for another year in the budget thus far. So you're hearing a number of different requests this morning, and they're all important because they are interconnected, as hunger and food insecurity measures always are. And we really believe that putting all of these requests together is going to make a measurable difference in ending hunger and reversing this spike in hunger that we have been experiencing in Vermont. People are still running out of food each month, and they don't have money to buy more. Individuals and families across the state are turning to the Vermont Food Bank and its network partners to help them put food on the table right now, today, while we work out these structural solutions. So we do ask that you please support them in meeting this extraordinary demand with an appropriation of $6 million for fiscal year 23. Of course, no child should ever have to learn what hunger feels like at school. All children need to focus on their learning and be able to do that because they're well fed and not worrying about whether or not they'll be able to eat lunch that day. So please support S100 this year and ensure that all students have access to 2 meals every day at school. And we're committed to collaboration and working together to address hunger in a smart, comprehensive way. So please help us bring this approach to the State House and work with us to think about how best to keep food insecurity in the spotlight in the legislature in the years to come. Thank you all so much for your time and attention to all of these important issues. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions now or in the discussion.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nora. And an issue that we haven't, of course, talked about this morning yet is, the skyrocketing prices of food today compared to even last year during the pandemic. It wasn't anywhere near as costly as it is today for whatever reason. But it just seems like every week when you go to the grocery store, prices have gone up again. And, people on limited incomes must, they're relying on food banks and the food shelves and all these places to help offset that high cost. Are there questions from the committee for Nora? Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if this is a question for Nora or someone else. Where does Vermont stand in terms of the other states with food insecurity? Is there any data available on that?
Yes, there is, and I can get you a more definitive answer. I don't have it at my fingertips. Vermont is certainly faring better than many other states. And a large part of that reason, I think, is the success of our coordinated efforts. And also that the our state government in Vermont has chosen to be very proactive and committed to taking advantage of all of the different pandemic options or opportunities created by all of the various pandemic relief bills that Congress did pass over the last couple of years. So for example, our state agency of education and our state agency of human services worked together in a really phenomenal way to make sure that pandemic EBT was that all of the different opportunities for pandemic EBT, our state took them and our state administered them in a way that made sure that really all families who were eligible for those benefits received them. And in case you don't know, pandemic EBT is its payments, it comes on an electronic benefits card that is like the Three Squares Vermont card, but it's designed to be a replacement for school breakfast and lunch and summer meal benefits that children would have been eligible for if they had been in school. But of course, over the last 2.5 years, school's been disrupted so many times, as you know, and for periods of time closed. And the same with summer meal sites because the pandemic made it unsafe to operate them. And so these are like replacement payments for the cost of those meals for families. And in some states, families had to apply themselves for those benefits. They had to go to some online portal and fill out information. In Vermont, our state agencies took on that burden themselves, and they used data from the schools and data from their systems to proactively identify the families who were eligible for those benefits and get the information from the schools about how many days of school each child had missed. And they sent those benefits out to families proactively. And so that was just a tremendous amount of work on the part of our state agencies that made a huge difference for families. And so, we've done a really good job collectively as a state in the face of really devastating circumstances. And so that has made a difference. And yet, the crisis has been so severe that we are still looking at 1 in 3, 1 in 4 people in our state experiencing hunger and food insecurity over the past couple of years. And we're seeing a new spike of need in especially in certain key areas of Vermont right now, which I know Carrie will talk more about from the Vermont Food Bank. So unfortunately, we've done an amazing job, and it's not enough to really stem the tide of hunger and food insecurity as these all of these different economic support programs are coming to an end.
Did each of the folks that are with us this morning receive some of that funding from the rescue plan and all of that? Do you know? I know.
Some organizations did, and some organizations did not. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members? If not, who's up next?
Amanda is going to speak with Everyone Eats.
Hi, thank you. My name is Amanda Whitman, and I live in Brattleboro, and I'm here representing Vermont Everyone Eats. I have 3 requests to make of you today, and they may echo things that others have already said, but I feel them no less passionately than anyone else. I'm asking you to please find a home for food security in the legislature so that we can all work together most effectively to address food insecurity in our state. And please support a forthcoming request from Vermont Everyone Eats for bridge funding to cover an anticipated 10% FEMA cost share for up to 1 year. And please support the Vermont Food Bank with an appropriation of $6 million for fiscal year 23 to address the ongoing increase in food security needs. As you're hearing today, a number of food security entities within the state have been meeting regularly and communicating, collaborating, strategizing to ensure that we're feeding as many hungry Vermonters as possible for as long as possible. But also acknowledging that we're all struggling with some of the same challenges. And of course, across the state, we've been doing a very good job of feeding Vermonters in need under the circumstances. We've done impressive work over the past 2 years to get more food out to more Vermonters who need it than ever before. And this is really encouraging, and I deeply appreciate all of your efforts in making that happen in so many ways. But of course, hunger continues to be a crisis, always, not just during COVID, but all the time. And I know we can do even better. One way we can make this happen going forward would be to provide a clearly assigned point of entry in our legislature so that requests and communications around food security can be received in context and considered holistically. They need a common place to land. My understanding is that if food security isn't anyone's assigned responsibility, then a request may get passed around for a while until someone finally takes it up, which is always appreciated. Certainly, but structurally, this is not sufficient to take our efforts to where they need to go long term. And an interagency approach to food security is important and it's valuable. And we're doing it in amazing and innovative ways, but it complicates communications around asks for funding and support. For example, Vermont Everyone Eats engages at least 3 state agencies on the way to feeding people because it's built on an innovative 3-legged stool model: restaurants, farmers, and eaters, which means economic support for the restaurants who make the meals, strengthening the local food supply through a local ingredients mandate, and providing the meals to eaters in need. So this program necessarily depends on high-level coordination, support, and participation of ACCD, AHS, the Agency of Agriculture, and stakeholders in other agencies. But when a program doesn't live in one agency, this complicates interactions around funding and support. Vermont Everyone Eats has been so successful that rather than end it, we're actively exploring ways to bridge the current program to a future iteration fueled by ongoing federal funding. And we're working hard to figure that out. Through July 1st, Vermont Everyone Eats will have been paid for 100% by either FEMA or the CARES Act. And after July 1st, we do expect FEMA to shift to a 90-10 cost share. And we'll need some state funding to fill that gap before a more permanent solution can kick in. So we've been in contact with the Senate Pro Tem with a request, and we'll be reaching out to the Senate Appropriations Committee as well. But this brings me back to the question that I'm asking today. Will you help create a home for food security so the interagency nature of Everyone Eats and other programs won't continue to complicate our ability to connect effectively and work together as efficiently as possible to support and address the needs of Vermonters? Food security needs a home. Please also support a forthcoming request from Vermont Everyone Eats for bridge funding to cover the anticipated 10% FEMA cost share for up to 1 year for as long as it's needed during that period. And please support the Vermont Food Bank with an appropriation of $6 million for fiscal year 23 to address the ongoing increase in food security needs. I really appreciate your time today, and I'd be happy to answer questions if anyone's got any now.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda, Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Amanda, what is the bridge funding number?
So what we've done is we've looked at a ramped down version of Everyone Eats over the course of 1 year after beginning on July 1st. And the number that we've come up with to cover that 10% for 1 year would be 1.8 million. And that would be assessed and dispersed quarterly. So we would be reevaluating at each quarter. It all depends on whether FEMA continues to fund the current incident. And obviously, if they stopped, then we would no longer have the opportunity to have a cost share with them. But we are working really actively on future solutions and just looking to bridge that. So we're talking with USDA and other entities about what may come. And I am not prepared to give a presentation on that today, but I can assure you that there are a number of people who are working real hard behind the scenes to come up with something that will be presented at some point. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I guess, is for Amanda, maybe Carrie. Some of the bigger pockets of ARPA money that remain are in business assistance. And I guess my question is, do we have a case to make? Is there data that would say basically food security, things like the food bank budget requests lead directly to workforce development? I mean, instinctively, if you're struggling for food, you're probably not crushing it at work if you have a job, right? So I'm trying to help people that my hunch is that legislators are very sympathetic to the case you're making, but would do well to be able to fit it into buckets that the governor and others are publicly interested in. And similarly for Everyone Eats, some of that money is earmarked for nonprofits and like that. And so just wondering if you've done any work to try to help us fit these requests into some of the other needs that are broadly supported by the budget we're looking at.
Thank you, Senator Pearson. That's a great question. I wish that I had more in-depth knowledge to be able to give you a complete answer, and I would welcome anyone else here who would like to respond to that question to please feel free to say something. We're certainly looking at working with the legislature, working with the state, working with state agencies in whatever way makes the most sense for everyone involved, and thinking creatively to try to find new ways to do that may not have been done before, because sometimes that leads to really incredible things. There is certainly an economic development component, a leg of the three-legged stool, and Everyone Eats that is just as important as the leg of feeding people. And those two are, they're sort of essentially intertwined in our program, not necessarily in other programs. I can't speak for other programs.
Dr. Pearson, I might be a little bit more helpful in that. There is data that the UVM NFACT team has that shows that a lot of the people who had job disruptions, not job loss, maybe loss of hours or shifts in schedules or, just brief periods of changes, were the people who were using charitable food, particularly during the pandemic. There's some other data that they may have, and none of them were able to be here with us today, but I'm happy to dig into that and to look a little bit more at how some of that data might support what you're saying. Also, prior to my work with the Vermont Food Bank, I worked with the United Way, and they operate a program called Working Bridges. And one of the primary supports that they offered was trips to the food shelf for people who were working during food shelf open hours. So there are programs that exist solely to connect people who are working to food, right? Just the fact of that program's existence for that purpose reinforces what you're saying, right? And I think you said it really clearly that people who don't have enough food to eat are not your most productive employees. I would love your help in figuring out how to make a case for that across the legislature, for this request that we have. I think many of our network partners are telling us that the folks that they serve are folks who have jobs. They're not just people who are on Social Security or retirees. There are those people too, but there are broad swaths of Vermonters who are using these services right now like never before. And I think that looking at that alongside looking at numbers of employment statistics would probably be helpful to all of us. And then to just back Amanda up a little bit, I would say that one of the primary functions of Vermont Everyone Eats is business support. It's to help those restaurants who need to make those meals in order to continue to have enough of an economic driver to stay viable. The beautiful benefit of that is that there are meals available in our communities, but I think the clear case there is that this is an economic support program for restaurants as well. Sorry, Amanda, I hope you don't mind me hopping in for you.
I also want to be really clear that the third leg of the stool is the farmers and food producers in Vermont. And we have been very staunch in our insistence that this be an equal leg of the stool. So you may know that the program has a minimum requirement that restaurants use 10%, a minimum of 10% ingredients that were grown or produced in Vermont based on the state definition of a local ingredient. And statewide, our average right now is 38%. So restaurants have really stepped up, and many of them have begun or strengthened their relationships with local farmers and food producers. Some restaurants who've never had that kind of relationship before have developed that as part of this program. So there is certainly economic benefit. In fact, what I have here says that we've funneled nearly 2.5 million in revenue to Vermont farmers and food producers alone over the course of the program. So it's both an economic benefit to the restaurants, but also to our agricultural sector, which is so important. I know we're all here. I know I don't need to convince you of that, but I just want you to know that many people recognize that, and that is built into the program as well.
Could I just follow up, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. So in terms of our help with strategy, I mean, I think to me, it would be some one-on-one conversations with Senator Sorokin, who plays a key role. He's played a key role in Everyone Eats as the chair of economic development, and is looking at workforce bills and also business assistance proposals in his committee. Then he will be invited to present to the Appropriations Committee. So if you have him as an ally, you've already got Senator Starr as an ally in that room. You're in touch with Senator Ballant. I assume you're in touch with the chair of Appropes. But those are, as I see it, some of the fairly significant still pots of money that are a little loosely defined. And to the extent you make a compelling case and can also make the workforce development case, the strengthening the economy case, to me, that's where the pitch becomes all the richer, because you're checking several boxes, in addition, of course, to food security. So anyway, I'm happy to talk offline, but that's a couple of quick ideas.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. And I also want to make sure that we keep the spotlight turned back on the fact that we're all here together with a diversity of requests, and that, as you've heard before, but I'm going to say it again, organizations who address food security in Vermont are working together and doing a good job of that, and we support each other. We support each other's asks. So I'm hoping that you will consider the Vermont Food Bank's ask and all the others that you hear today.
Yeah. And Amanda, just you probably already know this, but our president pro tem of the Senate, Becca Bell, she's been a very major supporter in appropriations last year and the year before to push this food systems along. No, she's been a real trooper when it comes to feeding our people and taking care of our small farms. In that, that 38% of local foods coming from local farms is really a great number. And so that's good. Are there other questions from any of the committee members right now? No, so we'll move forward. Who would like to speak next?
So I'd like to introduce Cynthia Green, who is the Farm to Early Childhood Partnership Coordinator at Shelburne Farms. Cynthia?
Yeah, welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Amanda, and thank you, committee. My name is Cynthia Green. I'm beaming in from South Burlington this morning, and I am the Farm to Early Childhood Partnership Coordinator with Shelburne Farms and Vermont Feed. But my background is early childhood. I'm an early childhood educator. I came up both through the public-private mixed delivery system, initiated actually scratch cooking, CACFP program, child adult care food program in my center. And so that is my background, but I'm also pleased to be working with these partners this morning on food security, thinking about what that looks like for children, very young children, and within the early childhood context. And I wanted to first thank this committee for your support of the Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants Program through the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I have to tell you, this program has absolutely been a catalyst for the farm to early childhood movement in Vermont. Our early childhood providers know about it. They continue to seek support, technical assistance and training through this program. And we just really deeply appreciate your commitment to this program for the future. I also, like my colleagues this morning, have 2 requests of your committee. And as we've all been talking about, there are a wide variety of food security issues, topics, agencies, programs that help support food security across the state, and early childhood is no different. And so when we're thinking about early childhood, we often don't know where to take food security topics within the legislature. And so like my colleagues, I too would request this committee either consider taking on the food security topic or helping us identify a committee where we can bring this issue and have rich discussions about how to address the needs both of early childhood providers, but very young children in the state. And then the second request that I have, like my partners, is we have many hungry children, certainly in Vermont still. And so to please support this $6 million appropriation to the Vermont Food Bank to help us feed these children. To put this into a little bit of context, since I think a lot of us have worked mostly in the school system, when we talk about early childhood in Vermont, we're usually talking about children birth through age 8. But if we talk about just momentarily for the children ages birth through 5, there are approximately the same number of children birth through 5 in out-of-home care every day that are in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and half of 4th grade. And so when you think about the number of children that we potentially need to feed in out-of-home settings, it's a pretty big number. So my work currently as the Farm to Early Childhood Partnership Coordinator touches food security within early childhood context in a variety of ways and with a variety of tables. The first primary area that I'm working with is as a co-lead with Trevor Lowell with the Vermont Farm to Early Childhood Coalition. This is a relatively new coalition that was developed in 2020 with support through the Association of State Public Health Nutritionists and the Centers for Disease Control funding. And this coalition is a cross-sector group of folks who focus on early childhood context in particular. And what we've discovered is that there's really a lack of data around nutrition security for the early childhood sector. We're not sure, we know pretty much where children are during the day, but we're unclear about where they're getting their food in the mixed delivery system. Some folks are accessing the child adult care food program. Sometimes that program's not accessible to early childhood centers. Sometimes our children are in a public pre-K setting, but they are not necessarily called out, and it's unclear if food is always accessible to them if it's a half-day program. So we are a little confused about data, and so our coalition is really working with partners to figure out what's going on for our young children. There are 2 primary efforts underway right now, and one is that the coalition is supporting the work of Hunger Free Vermont on a cost of meals in early childhood study. This study is really to gather qualitative and quantitative data about what's going on in early childhood, who's feeding children, how are they being fed, and the costs. We hope to Senator Pearson's question earlier about where does this tie in, we hope that this work will actually help inform Act 45, which is financing early childhood education systems. We hope that it will tie into that work to ensure that nutrition services are a component that is considered in the actual cost of quality care. And then the second data that we're working on right now is a geographic information mapping for the state of Vermont for the Child Adult Care Food Program. And this is in collaboration with our Agency of Education, Nemours, and Child Care Aware of America. And this map will help us lay Child Adult Care Food Program data, child care data, accessible child care data, food desert data, poverty data, and child opportunity index data in an interactive map that will help us create a visual of where there might be opportunities, where there might be gaps in services, and then there will be a narrative that goes along with this to help us identify some strategies for change. And so both of these reports and data collection efforts are underway. We hope to have final reports at the end of summer 2022. And again, hoping that these both can plug into the work that's existing. There are just a couple of other tables I want to talk about. We are very interested, this coalition and partners are very interested, and we're already starting to plug into the Farm to Plate Food Security Strategic Plan. So we're excited to be working with Becca and her team around that. And then the final area that we're really paying attention to, the coalition and our partners, we're really paying a close attention to the universal school meals and the local purchasing incentives that this committee has helped put together and foster. We're thinking about what that could look like for early childhood in the future. So if you're looking to expand and really thinking about digging in for early childhood, there are actually other states across the nation and nationally that have focused local purchasing incentives on the early childhood field. However, we might be the first to ever offer universal meals within early childhood, so that would be exciting as well. But we're tracking both in-state and out-of-state actions and trying to think creatively about where to bring both these data sets and our solution-oriented thinking. So again, I would just reiterate that we're really hopeful that we would find a legislative committee where we can bring this information, network with our partners who are moving on food security, on farm to school and early childhood, on universal school meals, and think about these children who are young and their families who need both food security, nutrition security supports, but also where are they during the day? Because our ultimate goal is to ensure that no matter where children are during their day, they're being well fed. So in closing, I would just say to reiterate, the $6 million too is a really important ask, and I appreciate your support of the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants Program. Thank you for your time this morning, and if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.
Thank you, Cynthia. Are there questions for Cynthia at this point? No. Well, thanks again. And when we get to the end, there may be some questions, Cynthia, that you could help us with. So appreciate your time. So who's up next?
I think that's me, Senators. Good morning. For the record, my name is Helen Rortfett. I am the Farm to School and Food Access Programs Director at NOFA, Vermont. I'm zooming in from the Old North End in Burlington this morning. And some of you know me wearing my Farm to School and Vermont Feed hat, and that is a large part of my work at NOFA. But today I'm coming to you speaking wearing my NOFA Food Access Programs hat. And my colleague Betsy will follow up sharing our perspective from Vermont Feed. In the interest of time, I'm going to try to be brief because there's still a few more important voices that I want to make sure we get to. And I just want to open by acknowledging that the budget that you're currently considering includes a one-time appropriation through the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets to NOFA to shore up our local food access programs in fiscal year 23. We have faced significantly expanded demand for these programs since the onset of the pandemic. And at the same time, also interruptions in our traditional funding streams. For example, an RFA from USDA is now over 4 months delayed from being released. So we're looking at likely having a funding gap in our crop cash program, which provides matching dollar for dollar match for SNAP users on fruits and vegetables at farmers markets around Vermont. In addition, we've done a lot of fundraising traditionally through our restaurant partners. And I think you all know that that industry as a whole is really struggling to recover from the pandemic as well. So our traditional fundraisers to support our farm share program have been in jeopardy. So we're really grateful for that one-time appropriation. It's really going to help us achieve or to rise to the occasion and to be able to continue to support Vermont households that are seeking to have access to local and nutritious food through CSAs and farmers markets in the coming year. So I know I'm also preaching to the choir here, but I would be remiss not to mention our farming community. And I urge you to ensure that any discussion of or coordination around food security include a robust plan for supporting our producers themselves to ensure a safe, nutritious, and resilient food supply. We saw how quickly the national food supply chain crumbled in the face of the pandemic disruptions. And yet we also saw our own farming community, in particular, the many small and medium-sized diversified ag producers around the state, really rising to that occasion to make sure that their communities and their neighbors were fed. And that community of small and medium-sized fruit and veg producers, livestock, small dairies, and other value-added producers really could use additional support as we move forward for small infrastructure investment and improvement opportunities such as cold storage or upgrading their wash stations, things of that nature. And so I really just would encourage you to think about that really critical role that those producers have played in shoring up our food system and our ability to feed ourselves. And make sure that there's adequate support for them to meet their needs. Some of the larger funding opportunities available, say through working lands, can be pretty cumbersome for smaller producers. So I'm going to put a pin in that because I'm pretty sure you're taking testimony on this very thing tomorrow, but happy to follow up with any further questions. And then lastly, like all of my colleagues, I really urge you to work together with us to find the appropriate committee or the appropriate home for these really intersecting issues and requests around food security. And of course, we really want to make sure and lift up that the Vermont Food Bank request for $6 million in fiscal year 23 is also on your radar. And it's going to be really, really important that they have those funds to continue to meet the very urgent need that we're seeing right now. So I'm going to wrap up right there unless there's any specific questions, and I'm going to pass it along to my colleague Betsy from Vermont Feed and Shelburne Farms.
Yeah, thank you, Helen.
Thank you all.
Are there any questions for Helen? No? Well, no questions, Helen. You're lucky.
Thanks.
No, I'm just kidding. So who's next? Betsy or?
Yeah, I can be super brief. And you've heard from all of us how much we each support the importance of the food bank being able to meet the food security of all Vermonters with their $6 million request, and working towards a coordinated response. So I think your committee really sees that connection between local food and support for farmers with strategies that feed kids and address food insecurity, such as farm to school and universal meals. And we have an opportunity as we're working to recover from the pandemic to address both immediate needs like the food bank request, as well as more structural changes like changing school meals. And we've seen that our expansion of school meals over time has made a difference in reducing childhood hunger some. So we know Vermont can actually make a difference so that fewer Vermonters are going to bed hungry at night. We can really make that difference. And our requests all work together to both create that safety net while working towards that long-term system change. I just want to note that we're very appreciative that the House budget passed with full funding of the local purchasing incentive for this year and full funding at $500,000 for the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants program. Those two programs are going to make a huge difference in the ability of schools to buy their food from Vermont farmers, as well as engaging students in where their food comes from, regardless of their zip code in the state. And so we're looking for your continued support of those two fully funded requests in the budget. So thank you. And I'm just going to pass it along in the interest of time, but happy to answer any quick questions.
Yeah, so the House passed budget, which we have now in the Senate, is in pretty good shape. I think the food bank money's in there as well. No, food bank money's missing. Well, I guess we got something to work on then.
Yeah, the food bank was not, we were included in the budget adjustment, which went through and passed, but we were not included in the fiscal year 23 budget.
Okay, because I know we had a little discussion last week or the week before in regards to money for the food bank. And so, in our committee, amongst the committee members. And so I know it's on people's minds. Yeah.
Great.
Any Chris?
Betsy, I want to say to everybody, and my prior questions were about the whole package, that you're all being very deliberate to be a strong coalition, and I respect that. I think it's a smart strategy. In this building, we have to sometimes also understand each of the individual parts. So just in the local incentive, can you help orient us? Local food incentive for schools. I recall that got fully funded in budget adjustment for next year. Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Now, that was, if memory serves, about $500,000, which is kind of akin to what we got last year. And how does that, this has been projected, as I understand, to be an increasing cost. We're moving, there's some progress with the idea of sticking with universal meals. And maybe as that gets more standardized, food directors have more opportunity to really engage in local food. And so I guess I'm worried that it's not adequate. It's not adequately funded, so are you worried about that? And is that, maybe in the swirl of all these demands, we set that aside and recognize we might come back in budget adjustment? But where I'm coming from, and I'll let you answer, but is that we're setting this up. And there's always been this tortured pay now. If you're a school, the state will get you back after you prove it. It's very risky if you're a food director. And if we have to then actually say, well, only 80% of you can have this fully funded, or you're only getting 80%, it's a problem, and we will not build a successful foundation. So should we be worried about that? Is there an ask, or is it a timing question before we really bring that into an ask?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Senator Pearson. This year's applications came almost exactly at the amount allocated, which was 500,000. So we did not need to go through budget adjustment. It was almost a perfect match. About 43% of the SUs applied, and they'll be receiving that incentive payment. For next year, we anticipate more schools, but it's complicated in terms of how many will continue to be purchasing at the threshold level. So we think the 500,000 for FY23 is a good amount to have. Over time, that will increase. That's our goal. That schools will increase their percentage and that incentive will increase, and we'll need further funding. But I think for this next year, we should be adequate with the 500,000 with an eye towards the goal is exactly as you said, to be increasing that funding.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No?
Also,
Well, thank you, Betsy. And who's, Meg, have you talked yet?
Nope, I'm going to go next. I am happy to speak. I'm Meg Burmeister. I'm the Executive Director of the Northeast Kingdom Council on Aging, and I live in Topsom. I am a little bit different than all of the others this morning, but I'm going to talk to educate you around how the area agencies on aging really fit into the food security system and how important it is. I am speaking today on behalf of the 5 area agencies on aging representing us. Well, I'll share about nutrition programs. I'd like to help you understand our approach. Each of our AAAs has a helpline where people can call to learn about programs, resources, and services available to meet their needs. The meals program is often the starting point for people to share and explore how best to deal with food insecurity, and often helps to begin a conversation of available options for older residents as well. From the framework of Health Begins at Home, we often are exploring ways to support people given their own unique needs. Wellness programs, case management, health insurance, counseling, volunteer services, options counseling, all help to provide a well-rounded means of supporting elders in our community. The Older Americans Act long ago placed value on the grassroots approach to ensuring the community need was represented on a local level with a strong emphasis on volunteers, thus ensuring the ability to meet the unique needs of our beloved state. In doing so, you'll note varied models about how meals programs relate to their geographic region. Several of the more populated areas will use larger vendors to provide meals, and others, like the Northeast Kingdom, for instance, use a system of nonprofit meal providers. This is a significant reliance on volunteers to take limited funding and achieve the results we're fortunate to be able to provide. While COVID funding assisted us in offering higher reimbursement for a time and increasing meals to meet demands, the funding is not endless. We all face the cliff that will occur as these funds are expended. For many in the pandemic is less intense as we move for spring, but for those on a fixed income, increased food and fuel prices are an increasing demand. People have to make choices that are hard, and for some it can be looked at as just adjust your budget, but for those living on a limited means, it's a new crisis emerging at a time when they can no longer support themselves. The meals program, Home Delivered, Congregate, and now Takeout, provide roughly 1/3 of the recommended daily intake as required by the Older Americans Act. I'll just add a comment in here that's not on my testimony, but as I listened to all of the programming today that we talked about, it was all for children and families and providing more than one meal a day. Menus are reviewed by a registered dietitian with oversight by the Area Agency on Aging. And 3 years ago, we presented before the legislature looking to envision how to provide a better way to provide meals for elders in our community. We're not here today to ask for that, but certainly we know that as we move forward, we will be. We have long held a work together on a shoestring budget, and that is reaching a crisis point as we now enter the third year of the pandemic. Given that our testimony was needing to be responded to rather quickly, I only was able to gather my data from the Northeast Kingdom, but you'll see on our testimony that in 2019, we provided 175 or close to 176,000 meals. And in 2021, that jumped to 240,000 meals. Quite an increase for a largely volunteer network of meal providers, small nonprofits trying to make it happen. Community collaboration has been critical in this effort, and the food bank has been innovative in helping us make sure that people's needs are met, whether that be through the Veggie Van Go program, their support to meal sites, having accessibility to food that they can afford to be able to provide. The need is not going away, and that's evidenced by all of the testimony that you've heard today. And our elders are certainly a component of it we need to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Are there questions for Meg? Those numbers, the meals, 240,000?
Mm-hmm.
That all in the Northeast Kingdom?
That's all in the Northeast Kingdom.
Golly, everybody got to eat a few times then.
We've been able to really step up and are so thankful for all of the community partners we work with. And just, you know, Senator Pearson, you asked about the job or workforce component. It's keeping work local in the communities so that there are some of the programs that have paid positions. And also up in the Newport area, we ended up using our community partners such as JPeak. It kept some of their employees employed during the pandemic. Now we've been working with Eastside Restaurant to provide for meals because the demand in that area has far exceeded what our local meal provider can provide.
No, it's worked very well. Of course, I'm from there, but you know, many people have called and we're very thankful to the organizations that did supply these meals. So no, it's worked well up there, and it's a small enough area, and people know others, and you know each other, and people are very thankful and appreciative of these meals. So are there questions for Meg? No, I guess we're good. Is there someone else that we've missed? I had Faye Mack on my list, but is she with us, or did she? No. Is there anyone else on the list that hasn't had an opportunity yet?
I think that would be me. I'm Carrie from the food bank.
We keep missing you for some reason.
It's because I should have just gone first when you offered it to me.
Well, thanks for hanging in there. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. And I'll try to keep this brief. I know you have a break coming up and I don't want to take too much of that, but my name is Carrie Stayler. I'm the Government and Public Affairs Officer at the Vermont Food Bank, and I live in Linden. First of all, I want to thank all of you on behalf of the food bank and our more than 220 network partners, including food shelves, meal sites, schools, hospitals, and housing sites that serve the needs of food insecure people across Vermont. On behalf of our network, thank you for all the support you've given us over the past 2 years. We could not have done the work at the scale that was required without the support of the state and specifically the legislature. And as you've heard from many of my colleagues, that's one of the reasons I'm here today. I would like you to help support us in fiscal year 23 with a $6 million appropriation to the fiscal year 23 budget. I'd also like to just really briefly give you a snapshot of what the food bank is seeing on the ground across the state. One of the things that has surprised us a little bit was just how challenging March was for many of our neighbors. One of the best ways the food bank has to take the temperature of where things are right now is through the numbers of attendees and households served at our Veggie Van Go events. And these events over the course of the pandemic have grown and have seen large increases compared to pre-pandemic. Really, right now, this program is serving a similar role to the USDA's Farmers to Families Food Box program. Many of these are public drive-through distribution events. They're done in partnership with local schools and hospitals. Each of these local partners chooses how to advertise these produce distributions because they were originally intended to serve these very concise demographics of a school, community, or hospital patients. Instead, over the course of the pandemic, many communities at large have come to rely on these food distributions to supplement their household food supply. In March alone, we saw increases of between 5 and 50% at 18 of the 24 events we hold monthly. Only about half of these events are open public events. The rest are only advertised to those distinct communities I mentioned. Even in those smaller, not as broadly advertised groups, there were still increases. Senator Starr, I think you'll be interested to know that we had the highest one-day attendance at a Veggie Van Go event in Newport last month, where 643 households drove up to receive food in just one 90-minute event. We've actually moved that location 4 times. It's now at the East Side Restaurant because we outgrew capacity at every other parking lot we could find in the Newport and Derby area. For comparison, November through January is usually the busiest time for these events, and the previous peak was 615 households. This increased attendance is one of the factors that has caused us to increase projections broadly across our organization about the amount of food that we'll distribute this year. We are estimating that instead of a decrease from last year, which we had initially hoped for, we will increase distribution. Last year's food distribution numbers, we distributed about 17.6 million pounds of food. We're expecting to meet that this year at this point in time. So it's very hard to tell what will actually happen. And I know at one point you had mentioned the cost of food. And I do just want to share a few numbers that we have about food increases. We received information last week that the cost of a dozen eggs for the food bank, which is less expensive than what people can pay themselves at the store, would be increasing 63%. These are for local Vermont eggs. And this price was not, was only a surprise to us in the amount that it increased. We've seen increases in vegetables, in spaghetti, in other shelf-stable foods. And every week, our procurement folks are sending me more information about prices that have gone up. I do want to share just a couple of short anecdotes from some of our network partners that reinforce actually what Meg was talking about seniors continuing to need support throughout this pandemic. One of the sites that we work with is Fairhaven Concerned. They're down in the Rutland area, and they're a small food shelf serving several small communities in that area. The director there shared with me that many of her clients are unable to afford food now more than previously because of the high cost of heating fuel, gasoline, and food prices at the grocery store. These price increases are causing more people to use her food shelf. Many of those folks are seniors in our community, though some of them, like our guest today, offered our families and younger people in our communities. She's seeing that pressure, she believes, because she's the only food shelf in 4 different towns that's open 5 days a week. So she offers a little bit better access. But that means that folks are traveling and burning gas to go find food at her food shelf. Additionally, I spoke with another meal site in the Northeast Kingdom who also supports seniors, and they've reopened their congregate meals. But what that means is now they're serving meals 3 ways instead of previously, 2 ways during the pandemic of takeout and home delivered meals. That means they need more volunteers, they need more packages, they need more, people on the road. They really have to increase how they're working. I think Senator Pearson, to your point, it actually means that there are some opportunities for work happening in these community sites who are using creative solutions to address food insecurity. I'm really sharing these to help underscore that broadly, there are a lot of different ways that our network is addressing food insecurity in communities across the state. throughout the pandemic, many of them have learned really hard lessons and have gotten very creative to address those needs. This leads me to ask for your support for $6 million to help continue this critical work to our network. By one estimate, just continuing to allow our network we used to charge for certain types of food, to continue to allow all food that comes through our doors to go out free to all of these community network partners costs $3.6 million a year, or $330,000 a month. That's more than half of the $6 million that we're requesting. Other parts of that request support distribution costs. Our own fuel fleet costs are up 35% in a month. There really are challenges that our communities and our network are facing in order to get food out to people across the state. I do also want to just underscore what many of my colleagues said. You know, so much of the work that we do as an organization depends on the work of all of the organizations who are able to be here today. We're often the backstop for a lot of this work. So much of the more long-term strategic work is happening with these organizational partners. Long-term solutions like universal school meals, like, you know, fresh Vermont food going into schools. There are federal programs that overlap with state programs. And I really just can't agree enough with them about how finding a place for these conversations to happen at the legislative level is key and so important to the future of solving hunger for the state of Vermont. I'm happy to take questions. I don't want to take any more of your time today than is needed, but I really appreciate you hearing all of us and staying for the rest of this testimony. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Carrie. You know, we work hard at this, but nowhere near as hard as you folks work at it and getting us the information that we need to convince our colleagues that you know, everybody's doing their best to do the right thing by of course, the end result is our citizens. And so, you know, we owe a lot of thanks to all you folks for the hard work that you put into getting the information, feeding the people, and supplying us with the information we need to keep everything moving in a positive direction. Are there questions, Chris and Pearson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment for Carrie and others. It's just really interesting, this ask to make a home for food security and food delivery systems. And just to let you know, the way the legislature does that is through our rules. And you can go and find all of the issues that when somebody files a bill, the Secretary of the Senate looks and says, oh, this relates to farms, and he looks at the rules. It goes, therefore, the bill goes to Senate Ag. Typically, we do that on the very first day of a new biennium, so January 3rd or whatever, 2023. And personally, I once changed the House rules to allow House Transportation to look at transportation related emissions. That was not part of their charge. And you know, it was a minor 2-word change, and you know, nothing revolutionary, but it's part of this cultural shift. So just to let you know, that's how it would happen. And I've made a note in my calendar for mid-November, win or lose, that I would spark this conversation, and because it really would be handled in the standard way at the very first day of session. So just to tell you about the strange little way our building operates, and it's terrific timing, and kind of amazing that this has not been articulated in our process, and speaks to the need for our evolution. So thank you.
Thanks for that insight.
Other questions from the committee members? All set. All set. Anything else that you folks would like to present to us before we close the meeting?
thank you again. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and we're all available. We'll follow up with a few of the questions, but certainly we're all available if anything else comes up. You need more information or have questions.
Yeah, and of course, you know, if you see something that you think we should hear about, certainly feel free to contact us. And you know, we have a recording of the meeting. I've been taking notes, and hopefully we'll end up next month in a good spot for everybody. Certainly our people of the state, and our children as well. So if there are no other questions or concerns, we'll adjourn the meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ready to go off the live stream?
Pardon?
Ready to go off the live stream?